Hi guys, my name is Jack, and today we are going to review with you another horrible case. And before starting the story, I want to apologize for my English. I'm not a native speaker, but I'm still trying for you. Thanks for understanding. Fateful morning. Wake up. Is anyone alive in this house? Judy cheerfully entered the home of her sister, Linda Slaten. The morning of September 4th was normal, but something seemed off. Judy often visited her nephews, and today she came to their home as usual. A cup of hot coffee and a friendly conversation with her sister was how their day usually began. "Where are you, little slackers?" Judy smiled, peering into the room of her nephews, who were sleepily rubbing their eyes. She was surprised to see Linda still asleep, for she usually woke up before the boys left for school. Judy left the house and noticed that the window in her sister's room was wide open and one of the curtains was missing. It was strange. "Why aren't you in school yet? Is your mom sick? Why is she still sleeping?" Judy walked restlessly toward her sister's bedroom. "Linda Slaten, I want to see you." Judy knocked on the door, but there was no answer. The next instant, the sight that came into view made her heart sink. Her sister's body lay across the bed, her head hanging to the floor. The young woman was half undressed, and a wire hanger was wrapped around her neck. There was no sign of a struggle in the room. The closet was open, but otherwise, everything looked normal, Linda's things lying in their places. Upon seeing her sister's body, Judy screamed, and the janitor working outside called the police. The police arrived and asked the children to leave the house, which had now become a crime scene. Jeff was able to walk past his mother's room without looking at her body. Tim, on the other hand, looked into the room and saw his mother dead. The boys were sent to their grandparents' house for the duration of the investigation. That fateful morning was the beginning of a mysterious and dark story. It changed their lives forever. Linda Slaten was born on a spring day, March 8, 1950. The girl dreamed of a large and happy family. Her fate, however, did not turn out the way she wanted. At the age of 19, Linda entered into marriage with Frank Slaten. At this age, she was already a mother. 3 years before the wedding, the couple had their first son, Jeffrey, and after another year, a younger son, Timothy, was born. And only after another year, Linda managed to convince the father of their children, Frank, to become a family. But, alas, this marriage turned out to be far from her expectations. Frank, after becoming a husband and father, disappointed his family. He turned out to be a cruel man. His outbursts of anger regularly fell on his wife and sons. Jeff and Tim's memories of their childhood were filled with nightmares. Their father was an aggressive alcoholic who kept his family in suspense. Linda often thought about divorce, but fear and addiction prevented her from taking that step. However, in 1974, after 9 long years of marriage, she gathered the last vestiges of strength and determination. Leaving behind the hell that was their family, Linda took her sons and left Frank Slaten. It was the first step towards a new life where Linda hoped she could give her sons the security and happiness they had been denied for so long. She didn't yet know the trials that lay ahead, including that terrible day that became fateful for her family. After the divorce, Linda and her 2 children lived at 303 North Brunel Parkway in Lakeland, Florida, which was one of Polk County's densely populated cities. In 1981, it was a place where business was booming, and new residential neighborhoods were being built on every corner. These were mostly duplexes where large families settled. Lakeland, with its abundance of lawns and greenery, was very attractive to residents. One of the many duplex homes belonged to the Slaten family. Despite this, they didn't stay in it for long. It is known that Linda and her sons moved to Florida from Hartsella, Alabama, just 2 weeks before the horrific crime. What could have led to such a gruesome tragedy? Perhaps Linda brought not only her children with her, but also dark issues from her past. After her divorce, Linda Slaten began a new life as a single mom. She strived to give her children everything she could, torn between work and home responsibilities. Linda didn't have a car, so her sons either walked to school or neighbors drove them. Despite the hardships, Linda never gave up and tried to provide her children with everything they needed. In addition to school activities, the boys also participated in the soccer section. But, since it was not always easy to get there without a car, Coach Joe became their savior. He regularly drove the brothers from home to the stadium and back. A week before the tragic events, on September 4th, Linda was actively preparing for her mother's move. She was sure that a woman living with them would be able to help Linda cope with the daily household chores and create an atmosphere of comfort and family harmony in the house. On the evening of September 3rd, Jeff returned home from a workout. He felt an empty feeling in his stomach, but there was no food in the house, so he decided to go to his grandmother's house. When he returned around 9:30 p.m., his brother and mother were not in the house. The boy turned on the TV in an attempt to distract himself, but his anxious thoughts did not leave him. The quarrel with his mother, which had occurred the day before, did not give him peace. He tried to put it out of his mind, but when he came home and did not find his relatives, he began to feel a strange longing. Usually at this time, their house was in a state of excitement. Linda's mother was cooking dinner in the kitchen, the smell of delicious food filling the house, and her younger brother Tim was merrily hanging around, sometimes running up to Jeff, hoping for a conversation. But sensing his brother's displeasure, he ran back to his mother. These moments were repeated several times until everyone was gathered around the table for dinner. Around 11:30 p.m., the noise and laughter of family members in the hallway interrupted Jeff's musings. His heart began to beat more calmly. His mother and brother came home, and Jeff finally went back to watching the movie that was coming to an end. At dinner, Linda talked about going to spend the evening with the neighbors and playing cards. But before that, she decided to do some housework. When his younger brother Tim went to bed, Jeff stayed and helped his mom wash the dishes. Before going to bed, he decided to stop by her room to apologize for the fight that happened between them earlier. Jeff remembers that his last words were, "I love you, Mom. I'll see you tomorrow." If only he had known that those words would be the last words he was able to say to his mother. September 4th, 1981 was a tragic day in the lives of two brothers, 12-year-old Tim and 15-year-old Jeff. It was then, on that terrible day, that they found their mother, Linda Slaten, dead in her bed. At the time, Linda was only 31 years old. Who could have committed such horrific cruelty against the mother of two defenseless children? Was it someone they knew, or was Linda the victim of a random attack? After Jeff and Tim left for their grandmother's house, Sergeant Edgar Pickett of the Lakeland Police Department arrived on the scene. He was the first detective to begin investigating this terrible tragedy. As soon as he arrived, police officers, reporters, and ambulances streamed to the house. The place was cordoned off. Yellow tape reading, "Crime scene, no trespassing," was stretched around the house. Sergeant Pickett was the first to uncover the most important piece of evidence in the case. On a window where the curtain was missing, he discovered a palm print that did not belong to the murdered Linda. This footprint could have been an important DNA sample, but at the time DNA testing was not yet widespread. To find out the exact cause of Linda's death, her body was sent for an autopsy. It revealed bruises on her shoulders, arms, and neck. The fact that she was half naked indicated a possible rape. After a detailed autopsy, it became clear that Linda had first been severely beaten, then abused, and then strangled with a hanger from her own closet. This horrific scenario became the starting point of the investigation, but there were still many questions. To solve the mystery of Linda Slaten's murder, the police decided to go through the genealogical tree of the Slaten family. The first suspect turned out to be Linda's ex-husband, Frank Slaten. Information about him indicated that he was a violent and aggressive man who often abused his wife and children and showed no concern for the family. Quite expectedly, Frank immediately came under the suspicion of the police. He was detained for questioning, but it soon became clear that he was in Alabama on the night of the murder. Nevertheless, the police did not rule him out as a suspect. The second suspect was Linda's eldest son, Jeff. On the day before the murder, he and his mother had a serious argument. According to witnesses, the relationship between Linda and her son had been strained recently. Jeff, as the eldest child in the family, had experienced the full brunt of living with an abusive father and then with his mother, who was raising his brothers alone. Their frequent conflicts were in plain sight, but Jeff always tried to smooth over quarrels and make peace with his mother, just as he did the night before Linda's murder. The police conducted 2 polygraph tests for Jeff, and both times the results were negative, thus eliminating him from the list of suspects. Third on the suspect list was Linda's boyfriend, whose name has not been released. This white man was a close friend of Linda's and often socialized with her children, but polygraph testing revealed nothing suspicious, and police were forced to clear him of suspicion. After Linda's funeral, the family gradually began to get the brothers' lives back to normal. The boys went back to school and tried to suppress in their minds the horrible event that had occurred at 303 North Brunel Parkway. Tim continued to attend soccer practice, and he always felt support from his team and coaches. Coach Joe stayed true to his promise and continued to give Tim rides home after practice. A month after the tragedy, Tim put a picture of the team and coach by his bed. Weeks turned to weeks, months turned to years, but the case of Linda's murder remained unsolved. The Slaten brothers had to accept the hard reality of their new life. Their mother had been murdered, and only their grandparents, Clarence and Margaret Harris, were left with them to support them through this difficult time. It had been a full 17 years since the horrific murder of Linda Slaten. The years have passed, and the boys who lost their mother have grown into grown men full of love and care for their own families. Both brothers started families, and Jeff had 2 children. However, he never forgot that last night. "I didn't hear anything at all. Even the neighbors claim they didn't hear anything suspicious that night. It weighs heavily on me," he often repeated in conversation with his loved ones. Sometimes, sitting in front of the television waiting for dinner, while his wife fussed in the kitchen and his children ran around him, Jeff would catch a glimpse of the past. At such moments, he was taken back to his childhood home, to the last evening with his mother. The unsettling feelings that had gripped him that last evening seemed to foretell a horror that would change his life forever. The voices of his children and wife, each time as a rescue, brought Jeff back to reality. Despite the successful lives the brothers have built, they have never stopped following the investigation and have worked hard to keep the case alive. They regularly return to Lakeland to see if there was any news in their mother's case. In an interview, Tim said, "No matter how many investigators are replaced, we always remind them that we are waiting to find whoever killed our mom. The burden is on us, and I can't let it go." In 2001, detectives finally had a new thread that could lead to the solution of this long-standing mystery. In the same neighborhood where Linda was murdered, police arrested a man named Jimmy Ulmer, who had similar mannerisms to Linda's killer. He was charged with the attempted murder of a little girl he had tried to pull through the window of her room. The police began to scrutinize his connections and alibis and discovered that he was now already sentenced to 80 years in prison for other crimes. For the police, he became the prime suspect. However, a small problem arose. By that time, Jimmy had already passed away, and it was impossible to conduct DNA testing. However, Jimmy's mother agreed to provide a sample of her DNA. Unfortunately, the results did not match the sample found at Linda's murder scene. The investigation again went unanswered. In 1998, the investigator who had been looking into Linda Slaten's murder, Edgar Pickett, resigned and was replaced by a new detective, Brad Grace. Grace discovered an unidentified DNA sample that had been collected at the crime scene back in 1981. He decided to send that sample to the state's largest laboratory, the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, to try to identify Linda's killer from the DNA. By 1999, the department already had the means to conduct such tests, and Detective Grace sprang into action. He reviewed the list of suspects and decided to collect DNA samples from each of them. In 2001, he was confident that he could find the perpetrator through his DNA. He first contacted the Slaten brothers and asked them to submit DNA samples for comparison with samples found at the crime scene. The results of the analysis completely ruled the brothers out as suspects. Detective Grace then contacted Linda's ex-husband, Frank Slaten. Frank, after Linda's death, had reevaluated his life and was living a good life. Frank voluntarily gave up his DNA samples. Again, no matches were found. In 2005, Grace submitted DNA samples from the unknown perpetrator to the FBI to be tested against the data in the federal database. These comparisons were made regularly, but were inconclusive. Eventually, 17 years after Linda Slaten's murder, Detective Grace retired and was replaced by Detectives Tammy Hathcock and Russell Hurley. After 3 more years of investigation, Tammy Hathcock learned of a new DNA recognition technology developed at the Florida Department of Law Enforcement. She sent a DNA sample from the crime scene to expert Cecile Moore. Using a genealogical database and other documents, Cecile Moore compiled a family tree that led to the person suspected of killing Linda Slaten. This moment proved to be a turning point in the investigation and a shocking one for the Slaten brothers. The face of the killer was in one of the photographs in Tim's bedroom. That man turned out to be Joseph Clinton Mills, also known as Coach Joe. Police began investigating Mills' background and found that he had been charged with grand larceny and forging a will, but was not convicted of it. His fingerprints and palm prints were kept in police databases. To establish Joseph Mills's guilt, police had to match his DNA to that found at the scene of Linda Slaten's murder. Detectives decided to obtain a sample of Mills's DNA without his knowledge. The veracity of this information is unknown, but this is the version that is included in the case. Police collected trash from a dumpster at Mills's house and found a Band-Aid with traces of blood on it. This patch was sent for examination. At this time, detectives were investigating the suspect's background. Joseph Mills had spent most of his life in the town of Kettleman, which is only 30 minutes from the crime scene. He had a family, children, and grandchildren. 2 weeks later, the lab's response came back. The DNA from Linda Slaten's murder scene matched Joseph Mills' DNA. This result became a key piece of evidence in the case, and Joseph Mills was arrested and charged with the murder of Linda Slaten. In December 2019, Joseph Mills was arrested and taken to police for questioning. He was only 20 years old at the time of Linda Slaten's murder in 1981. Detectives conducted an interview with Mills at the time, but it was done over the phone, and he did not become a suspect in the murder. Now, after years of investigation, it was impossible for Mills to deny his involvement in the crime. According to his testimony, on the night of the murder, he had come to Linda's home with her consent for sexual relations. But detectives doubted his version. They speculated that Mills had been watching Linda for some time because he regularly drove her children to practice. According to investigators' version, after the coach brought the boy home from practice, he waited until the house was empty before sneaking into Linda's room through a window. Hiding in a closet, he waited until she was alone in the room. He then came out of hiding, beat and abused Linda, and strangled her with a wire hanger from her own closet. At trial, Joseph Mills was found guilty of first-degree murder and rape. The investigation and trial finally brought long-awaited justice to this horrific crime that had gone unsolved for years. The sons of the murdered woman were still left in shock and could not understand what motivated Joseph to kill their mother. The court hearing was tense. Linda Slaten's children, Tim and Jeff, sat on a spectator bench defending the memory of their mother. At the center of attention was Joseph Clinton Mills, Coach Joe. This man who once seemed like a role model sat in an accusatory cage. His gaze was cold and indifferent, as if nothing had happened. Tim Slaten, the oldest of the brothers, looked at the man he had once revered, and now saw in him the face of evil. The fire of indignation burned in Tim's eyes, and he jumped to his feet, turning to Joseph. "Why? I just want to understand why, Joe. Why did you kill our mom? Why did you take her away from us? We were so happy." Mills only mumbled back, "I'm a good man." The Slaten family never received an apology or remorse from him. Probably even the killer himself had a hard time explaining his actions. This came as a shock to Tim, because as a child he had considered Coach Joe a role model. Now, he is left with only questions and painful memories. Joseph Mills was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As if a heavy stone had fallen from the Slaten brothers' shoulders, their mother was finally avenged. And while the brothers console themselves with the thought that the killer will spend the rest of his days in prison, they are still furious at the fact that Joseph Mills enjoyed freedom for nearly 40 years while they lost their mother. Linda Slaten's story, her tragic death, and years of investigation have left an incredible mark on her sons. Tim and Jeff Slaten, two brothers who not only witnessed this tragedy, but also became first-hand participants in the investigation, share their experiences and feelings. He kept asking us how the case was going, says Tim, the older of the brothers. He didn't ask specific questions. He just wanted to know if there was any news on the case, if there was any new evidence, and I just told him that nothing had changed. Tim still can't believe that his mother's killer was a man he considered a friend and respected. The picture of him standing behind Joseph Mills has always reminded him that life goes on, but without his mom. Jeff, the younger brother, always thinks about how his life would have turned out if Mom had been alive. This tragedy has left an unbearable void in his heart that nothing can fill. Despite all the hardship and suffering, the Slaten brothers try to live a full life for their mother, Linda Slaten. They visit her grave regularly, placing fresh flowers and praying that she knows they will never forget her and will continue to fight for justice. Linda Slaten's story is one of fortitude, of incredible endurance, and of the fact that even after the most horrific losses, the love and memory of loved ones lives on in the hearts of those left behind. Thanks for watching, guys. That was Jack. Subscribe to the channel. There are a lot of shocking stories ahead. Hey guys, today we're diving into another truly horrifying case. If you want to support my channel, make sure to subscribe and stay active. It really helps me out. I'd be super grateful for that. Let's get started. They say any form of aggressive behavior can stem from a wide range of psychological and social factors. Still, psychologists to this day struggle to provide a clear explanation for why people commit serious crimes, especially ones as extreme as taking another person's life. Sometimes, individuals take this terrifying step in pursuit of personal goals or hidden agendas. The story of Ezra McCandless and Alex Woodworth is a complicated, bizarre, and deeply unsettling one. At first, they were just friends. Over time, their bond evolved into a passionate relationship, one that ultimately brought more harm than good to both of them. After their breakup, Ezra allegedly tried to accuse her former partner of aggressive misconduct and unwanted advances, seemingly to justify her infidelity to her then partner. When this attempt didn't work out the way she'd hoped, she appeared to use Alex as a pawn in a plan to win back her ex. But Alex refused to play along with her manipulations and paid the ultimate price. The situation took a tragic and extremely disturbing turn. Alex lost his life in a violent and deeply unsettling manner, allegedly at the hands of someone he once cared about. The chain of events highlights not only the complexities of human relationships, but also the dark psychological motivations that can lead a person down a path of destruction. It's a haunting reminder of how dangerous obsession and emotional manipulation can become when boundaries are crossed and reason is lost. Ezra McCandless was born in February 1998 in the city of Springfield, Dane County, Wisconsin. At birth, her name was Monica Kaiser. There's very little public information about her early life or family background. What is known is that she was often described as highly emotional, impulsive, and at times unpredictable. She pursued her goals with intensity, sometimes disregarding consequences in the process. After graduating from high school, Monica enrolled in college, where she studied management. It was there she met a young man and quickly became involved in a passionate relationship. However, the romance was anything but stable. The couple frequently argued, and on several occasions, their conflicts escalated into physical confrontations. Eventually, the relationship ended, with the boyfriend choosing to walk away, something that deeply impacted Monica's mental and emotional well-being. She became determined to win him back at any cost. Around the same time, Monica's parents decided to end their marriage after nearly 2 decades together. Their separation only worsened her fragile state. The emotional toll of her family's conflicts, combined with the painful breakup, left her feeling overwhelmed. In a moment of emotional upheaval, the 19-year-old made a bold decision: to leave everything behind and start over in a new city. She dropped out of college and legally changed her name to what she believed sounded more distinctive, Ezra McCandless. In early 2017, she moved to Eau Claire, a small city in western Wisconsin. At the time, she didn't have a clear plan for her future. Ezra began frequenting a well-known local coffee shop and cafe called Racy Delene's, where she met a young employee named Alex Woodworth. Alex had just turned 23. He was a student and worked part-time as a barista to support his studies. They started talking regularly, and over time, a friendship developed between them. In May 2017, at that same cafe, Ezra, still just 19, met Jason Mengel, a 33-year-old former military medic. Despite the significant age difference, the two quickly grew close and entered into a romantic relationship. Interestingly, Jason was a friend of Alex's, and it was through Alex that Ezra and Jason met. Jason was calm, approachable, and emotionally stable, quite the opposite of the fiery and impulsive Ezra. But as often happens, opposites attract. Just a month after they met, Ezra moved into Jason's home, and they began living together as a couple. Later, Jason shared that he had fallen for Ezra, the petite woman with curly light brown hair, from the moment he saw her. To him, she seemed charming, full of energy, slightly eccentric, and fond of attention. Ezra, in turn, saw Jason as a dependable partner, someone she could build a lasting and stable future with. Ezra and Jason continued to frequent Racy Delene's, often spending time with Alex. The three of them developed a close and seemingly trusting friendship. It's worth noting that Alex was studying both philosophy and psychology and dreamed of one day becoming a teacher at a high school or college. He was known for his kind, gentle nature and willingness to help anyone in need, qualities that naturally drew people to him. The trio soon became nearly inseparable. While the dynamic may have seemed unusual to some, they got along effortlessly and seemed to genuinely care for one another. Meanwhile, Ezra and Jason's relationship appeared to flourish, and those around them began to refer to them as the perfect couple, believing it was only a matter of time before they got married. In October 2017, what had once seemed like a picture-perfect relationship between Ezra and Jason began to fall apart rapidly. It all started when Ezra discovered, quite unexpectedly, that she was pregnant. She was overwhelmed and unsure of what to do. She broke the news to Jason, her partner of nearly 6 months at the time, and he too was completely caught off guard. Neither of them had planned for such a major life change, and starting a family was not part of their immediate future. Lacking the emotional support she needed, Ezra and Jason eventually agreed that the pregnancy should be ended. The decision was deeply distressing for Ezra, but after some thought, she went to a clinic and had the procedure done. That event marked a turning point, the beginning of the unraveling of a relationship that many had once considered strong and full of promise. Ezra sank into a state of depression. She withdrew from others, became noticeably anxious and short-tempered, and her emotional health began to deteriorate rapidly. She would often cry without any clear reason, and then suddenly spiral into arguments or emotional outbursts over seemingly minor issues. Jason tried to remain patient and supportive, but he could feel the situation slipping out of his control. Around this time, Ezra started spending significantly more time with Alex. They would go on long walks and talk for hours, opening up to each other about personal struggles. Jason didn't see anything inappropriate in their growing closeness. He knew Alex was studying psychology seriously and believed that such a friend could be a positive influence for Ezra, especially considering her unstable state of mind. After all, the three of them had known each other for a while and shared a deep level of trust. Alex proved to be a compassionate listener. He never judged, criticized, or dismissed Ezra's emotions. He was thoughtful, intelligent, and had a curious mind, traits that made him easy to connect with. Ezra felt understood and accepted, for who she truly was. With Alex, she didn't have to pretend. She could be vulnerable, pour her heart out, and speak freely about anything. Their bond deepened into mutual attraction, which eventually led to an intimate relationship. Since Ezra was still officially involved with Jason, the two kept their affair a secret. Naturally, Jason had no idea that the person he trusted most was seeing his closest friend behind his back. Ezra's demeanor began to change. She stopped crying, seemed noticeably happier, and wasn't starting as many arguments. It appeared she was returning to her old self. Jason, seeing her in better spirits, assumed that her friendship with Alex was helping her heal. He had no clue that he was now the third party in a hidden love triangle. This double life went on for several months. During that time, Ezra didn't make any serious plans for her future. She simply went with the flow, enjoying the attention from both men without fully considering where this path might lead. Then came a turning point. One January evening in 2018, while Ezra was asleep, her phone, left in the living room, began buzzing with incoming messages. Jason, curious about the late-night activity, picked it up to see who was texting her so persistently. What he found shocked him. The messages were from Alex, and the content made it clear that his girlfriend had been in a romantic relationship with his friend for quite some time. The confrontation that followed was intense. Despite Ezra's attempts to deny everything and offer shaky excuses, Jason didn't believe her. They had been living together for 8 months, and for 3 of those, Ezra had been secretly involved with Alex. Feeling deeply betrayed, Jason ended the relationship on the spot. By the next day, he had packed her belongings and asked her to leave. Ezra's relationship with Alex soon unraveled as well, and the two went their separate ways. Now left completely alone, without either of the men she had once been involved with, Ezra found herself overwhelmed by resentment, heartbreak, and the crushing realization that she could no longer control the situation. The emotional weight of her circumstances pushed her into a state of despair, and she struggled to figure out her next move. Seeking a change of scenery, she returned to her hometown and moved back in with her father. Still clinging to hope, Ezra continued reaching out to Jason every day, calling and sending messages in an effort to win him back. Jason responded, but his tone was distant and cold. It was clear he had no interest in rekindling their relationship. Ezra tried to paint herself as a victim of unfortunate circumstances. She placed the blame squarely on Alex, begging Jason for forgiveness and swearing that everything that had happened was a terrible mistake. But Jason wasn't buying it. Consumed by frustration and emotional turmoil, Ezra's behavior began to spiral. She started exhibiting increasingly erratic and concerning signs. At one point, she went to the police and filed a report, alleging that she had been assaulted by one of Jason's friends. According to Ezra, the individual had spiked her drink during a party and taken advantage of her while she was incapacitated. However, Ezra had no concrete evidence to support her claims. Her story shifted frequently, and her statements lacked consistency. Investigators quickly began to suspect that she wasn't being truthful. Ezra claimed her memory was hazy because of the substance allegedly put in her drink, but even with that explanation, her version of events raised more questions than answers. Surprisingly, Jason seemed to believe her. He even called to comfort her after hearing the news. Ezra took this as a sign that he still had feelings for her and interpreted his concern as proof that their bond hadn't faded. Looking to gain more credibility, Ezra informed police that Alex had been aware of the alleged assault because she had told him about it the following day. She expected him to back her up. But when questioned, Alex refused to go along with her narrative. Instead, he told investigators that the interaction in question had been entirely consensual. Ezra was furious when she learned of Alex's statements. She had counted on his loyalty and support, and what she perceived as a betrayal pushed her over the edge. In a retaliatory move, she attempted to accuse Alex himself of misconduct. claiming he had behaved inappropriately and aggressively toward her. But Alex came prepared. He turned over extensive message history that showed their relationship had not only been consensual, but that Ezra had often initiated their secret encounters. The evidence contradicted her claims entirely and undermined her credibility with the authorities. Publicly exposed, discredited, and humiliated, Ezra developed a deep and burning resentment toward Alex. Still, she wasn't ready to let go of her plan. She continued to believe she could use him as a means to win Jason back. But this time, her plan was much darker. In Ezra's mind, Alex would either help her, willingly, or be removed as an obstacle, no matter the cost. After Ezra's failed attempt to accuse Alex of misconduct, she seemed to vanish. For more than a month, there was no word from her, and Jason was beginning to believe she had finally moved on with her life. But on the morning of March 22nd, 2018, Ezra suddenly reappeared in Eau Claire as if nothing had happened. She knew exactly where to find both of her former partners and went directly there. Ezra walked into Racy Delene's, the local cafe where Jason happened to be having breakfast. He was visibly startled to see her. Her sudden appearance felt like a red flag. She asked where Alex was, and when she learned that he wasn't working that day, she abruptly left. Jason had a gut feeling something wasn't right. Suspecting she might head to Alex's house, he decided to follow her. Concerned about what might happen, he got on his bike, hoping to avoid drawing attention, and quietly trailed behind her. Ezra drove her 2003 Chevrolet Impala straight to Alex's place. Jason saw her car parked outside and realized she had gone inside. Wanting to make sure everything was okay, he approached a window and peeked in. Inside, Ezra and Alex appeared to be having a tense conversation. Their expressions made it clear this wasn't a friendly chat. Jason, worried, decided to step in. He entered the house, surprising both of them. They tried to act casual, but it was clear they hadn't expected him. Just then, a police car pulled up. Alert neighbors had called in a suspicious person looking into windows. All three came outside and reassured the officers that everything was fine. Ezra silently got back into her car, though she didn't leave right away. Once law enforcement was satisfied that no laws were being broken, they left. Jason followed soon after, riding away on his bike. That left Ezra and Alex standing by her car, continuing their conversation. It was the last time anyone would see Alex Woodworth alive. Ezra later convinced Alex to go for a drive with her so they could talk things over in private. He agreed, and they got into her car. She left the city limits and took a rural road through fields and woods without any clear destination in mind. What exactly was said during that drive is still unclear. But Ezra later claimed she asked Alex to help her fix things with Jason. She wanted him to take responsibility for everything that had happened, to convince Jason that he had pressured her into an intimate relationship, and that she had later regretted it. Alex refused. He wouldn't lie to protect her. He stood his ground. That refusal triggered a strong reaction in Ezra. She reportedly slammed the gas pedal, speeding down a rough, muddy dirt road. The car jolted violently over bumps and potholes. At one point, she lost control, veered off the road, and the vehicle became stuck in the thick mud, a result of heavy rain the night before. Despite multiple attempts to get free, the car bottomed out and the engine stalled. They were alone, with weak cell service, and the nearest house was miles away. Tensions quickly escalated. An argument erupted in the confined space of the car. What followed was a violent and bloody incident. To this day, investigators have been unable to piece together exactly what happened next. Ezra changed her story multiple times, and each version conflicted with physical evidence. The case quickly grew more complex, as the clues never quite lined up with her ever-shifting narrative. Let's fast forward several hours. Around 8:30 p.m., a young woman, battered, barefoot, her clothes torn and soaked in mud and blood, stumbled onto the porch of a remote farmhouse. She was shaking from the cold and fear, crying uncontrollably and begging for help. The homeowner, John Sipple, and his family had just sat down for dinner when the distressed stranger appeared, disrupting their evening. They brought her inside, wrapped her in a warm blanket, and called the police. The woman said she'd been attacked, was injured, and needed medical help. She then collapsed onto the floor, curling into a ball and sobbing. She identified herself as Ezra and said someone had tried to take her life. Clearly in shock, she muttered incoherently, appeared disoriented, and seemed unable to comprehend where she was or what had just happened. Repeatedly, she mumbled, "It was Alex. It was Alex," and then pleaded for someone to contact a man named Jacob, referring, in fact, to Jason Mengel to tell him what had happened. When police and emergency responders arrived, Ezra was visibly distressed and in a highly agitated state. She cried out that someone wanted to hurt her and begged them not to let it happen. Her clothes were slashed and torn, and her entire body appeared to be covered in blood. But after a thorough examination, paramedics discovered only shallow surface cuts, none of which were life-threatening. In fact, her blood loss was minimal, raising a disturbing question. If she wasn't seriously injured, whose blood was she covered in? Ezra avoided direct questions, blaming memory loss and trauma. She kept asking for Jason Mengel. Authorities contacted him, and he rushed to the hospital where Ezra had been taken. Still believing she had been attacked, Jason was shocked when Ezra placed the blame squarely on Alex. Regardless, he embraced her and did his best to offer comfort. Ezra continued to insist that Alex had been the one who attacked her, but she claimed she couldn't remember where it had happened. She vaguely suggested it might have been somewhere near Owen Park, in Eau Claire. In reality, this was a deliberate misdirection. Ezra was trying to delay the discovery of Alex's body, which was still inside her car. As she calmed down, Ezra gave police a more detailed version of events. She said she'd gone to Alex's house to talk, but he suggested they go for a drive, and she agreed. According to her, Alex dictated where she should drive, and she followed his instructions out of fear. She claimed he demanded that she return to a relationship with him, and when she refused, he became enraged. Ezra alleged that at one point, Alex forcibly grabbed the steering wheel, causing the car to veer off the road and get stuck in the mud. Then, she said, he pulled out a knife and told her that if they couldn't be together, he had the right to one last moment of closeness. She claimed he held the knife to her throat and began tearing at her clothing. She told police she tried to fight back, but he began slicing her jeans and blouse and inflicted shallow cuts on her body. According to her, he also verbally insulted her throughout the incident. On her left forearm, investigators noted a disturbing detail. The word "boy" had been carved into her skin. Ezra explained that she had struggled with gender identity during her teen years, a deeply personal issue she had once shared with Alex. She believed he used that information to humiliate her in a cruel and targeted way. According to Ezra's account, while the attacker was distracted, she managed to wrestle the knife from his hands and began striking out blindly, not knowing exactly where she was hitting. When Alex went still, she said she climbed out of the car and wandered aimlessly through the woods until she reached the remote farmhouse where she was eventually found and helped. Her story, however, was riddled with inconsistencies. She often contradicted herself and blamed her confusion on shock and memory loss caused by trauma. Ezra repeated the same line over and over. He wanted to hurt me and end my life. Yet without a clear crime scene or physical evidence to examine, law enforcement couldn't determine how much of her story was true. As officers began their search for the location she had described, Owen Park in Eau Claire, they came up empty. There was no sign of an altercation, no car, no blood, and no clues. The next day, investigators started from the Sipple farm and followed Ezra's barefoot tracks through the wet, muddy terrain. Eventually, In a field not far from the property, they spotted a Chevrolet Impala partially concealed in thick roadside brush. The scene they uncovered was horrific, one that even seasoned officers were unprepared for. The car's interior was drenched in blood. It coated the seats, floor, dashboard, windows, and even the ceiling. Hanging out of the partially opened passenger side door was the mutilated body of a young man. A large pool of blood had formed beneath him. Forensics would later count 16 deep knife wounds, along with several shallow cuts. The weapon was nowhere in sight. Most of the wounds had been inflicted to the neck, chest, and groin area, severing critical arteries and resulting in rapid blood loss. The victim had continued to be attacked even after he had stopped showing signs of life. Based on the body's position, it appeared he had tried to escape the car but was blocked. Some wounds were delivered from outside the vehicle, as if the assailant was standing by the open door, preventing his exit. The weapon, a large hunting knife, was later found in nearby bushes, around 70 feet from the car. Investigators traced it back to Ezra's father, an avid outdoorsman. That meant Ezra had brought the blade with her, raising serious questions about premeditation. But the inconsistencies didn't stop there. Officers found neither Ezra's nor Alex's cell phones inside the vehicle. Both had been discarded in the field nearby. Ezra had apparently taken them with her after the incident and thrown them away during her escape. When asked about this, she couldn't offer a clear explanation. Forensic experts found extensive defensive wounds on Alex's hands, consistent with someone trying desperately to protect themselves. He had even grabbed the knife blade, evident from deep cuts on his fingers and palms. By contrast, Ezra's wounds were smooth, shallow, and so neatly done that they likely wouldn't leave permanent scars. Her narrative was quickly unraveling under the weight of physical evidence. Piecing everything together, investigators concluded that Ezra had taken the knife with her that day, already preparing for a confrontation. She had hoped Alex would help her reconcile with Jason by accepting full blame for their affair. When he refused, she enacted a far more sinister and calculated plan. The motive, according to detectives, was chilling. Ezra allegedly intended to eliminate Alex, then frame him for an attack. She would present herself to Jason as the innocent victim and Alex as a dangerous manipulator. In her mind, Jason would believe she had been pursued and hurt, and this would lead to a dramatic reunion between them. There was little doubt among investigators that Ezra had inflicted her own injuries deliberately and carefully. She had no bruises, no defensive wounds, no evidence of a struggle. Even the word boy carved into her arm had been etched at an angle indicating self-infliction. Detectives believed Ezra took the phones with her in case Alex somehow survived and tried to call for help. While she had inflicted multiple fatal wounds, she wasn't a medical professional. She couldn't be certain he was gone for good. With the physical evidence mounting against her, Ezra McCandless quickly went from being seen as a victim to becoming the prime suspect in a brutal crime. Despite the overwhelming forensic findings, she stuck to her story, firmly denying any wrongdoing. But on April 6, 2018, just 2 weeks after the incident, Ezra was formally charged and taken into custody. She was indicted on charges of first-degree intentional homicide, tampering with evidence, and providing false information to investigators. The shocking nature of the case rocked the quiet town of Eau Claire, drawing major media attention throughout the state of Wisconsin. Due to the complexity of the case and the time needed to collect and process evidence, the trial didn't begin until October 2019, about a year and a half after the crime. The prosecution presented a clear and compelling narrative, backed by a wealth of forensic evidence. Medical examiners emphasized that Ezra's injuries had been self-inflicted and deliberately superficial, added after the fact to support a fabricated story. Ezra's defense attorney argued that his client was dealing with significant emotional and mental health challenges, worsened by her painful breakups with Jason and Alex. He claimed that in the moment of the crime, she was not fully aware of her actions. However, a court-ordered psychiatric evaluation directly contradicted that argument. It concluded that Ezra was of sound mind at the time of the incident, had premeditated her actions, and deliberately attempted to mislead the investigation. Inside the courtroom, Ezra broke down in tears, insisting that Alex had behaved aggressively and attacked her first, and that she had acted purely in self-defense. But by then, her credibility was shattered, and the jury wasn't convinced. On November 1st, 2019, Ezra McCandless was found guilty of first-degree intentional homicide with aggravating circumstances. She was sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole only after 50 years. The judge noted that Ezra showed no remorse and expressed no regret for what had occurred. During the trial, Jason Mengel took the stand as a witness. Throughout his testimony, he never once looked in Ezra's direction. Following the sentencing, he never visited her, despite multiple requests from Ezra for a meeting. Jason had made his decision. He had permanently removed her from his life. Thanks for watching, everyone. Your support means a lot to me, and you can help my channel grow by hitting that like button, dropping a comment, and sharing this video. Your engagement really makes a difference. See you soon. Hi guys, my name is Jack, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The Lissy family tragedy. What drove a devoted family man to the brink? How can one identify a psychopath? Let's delve into what this term encompasses. Psychopathy is a personality disorder marked by distinctive traits, such as a lack of empathy and compassion, emotional shallowness, egocentrism, and a deceitful charm. While not an exhaustive list, these qualities are commonly observed in psychopaths. Such individuals are adept at adapting, skillfully manipulating those around them, and expertly concealing their true nature, often to the extent that even those closest to them may not recognize the potential danger. The Lissy family's story serves as a chilling reminder that someone perceived as a loving and close family member can suddenly morph into a remorseless perpetrator, sparing not even their own children. The man's behavior and his stated motives for committing such a heinous act were so alarming and shocking that they raised questions about his sanity. Yet, to everyone's astonishment, a psychiatric evaluation revealed that he was fully aware of his actions and had premeditated the horrific crime. This case shook Italy to its core, particularly the serene province of Mata Visconti, where this tragedy unfolded, marking it as the most notorious crime in the small Milanese suburb's history. Now let's methodically unravel this story and attempt to trace the sequence of events that led to such a tragic conclusion. The tragedy in Mata Visconti. In the early hours of Saturday, June 14, 2014, the quiet town of Mata Visconti was awakened by the desperate cries of a man. Peering out their windows, residents saw their neighbor, 31-year-old Carlo Lisi, calling for help. He appeared frightened and disoriented, mumbling incoherently and pleading for someone to call the police. As people from nearby homes gathered, Carlo revealed that his entire family had been victimized by intruders who had broken into their home, while he had miraculously survived because he was out with friends at a local sports bar, watching the soccer match between Italy and England. He mentioned that everything seemed normal when he left his house earlier that night, but upon returning, he found his home in disarray and the lifeless bodies of his 38-year-old wife, Christina, their 5-year-old daughter, and their 1.5-year-old son. Neighbors immediately called the police and emergency medical services. While waiting for them to arrive, the operator asked Carlo to check if any of his family members had a pulse and to possibly start CPR if there were any signs of life. To this, he screamed that he wouldn't step inside his house again or touch the bodies. While his behavior could be attributed to shock, it was peculiar that he referred to his family members as bodies, even before confirming their demise. Carlo's odd behavior didn't stop there. When police and medical personnel arrived and confirmed the deaths of his wife and children, he barely reacted. He attempted to cry, but only managed contorted facial expressions, with his eyes remaining dry and his face almost indifferent. He struggled to recall the sequence of his actions, gave conflicting statements, but claimed to have recorded the moment he discovered the bodies on his phone's camera. He believed the recording would prove his innocence, but it turned out to be one of the main pieces of evidence against him, among many others. This was the beginning of a high-profile case that was quickly solved. The robbery narrative, strongly advocated by Lissy, was dismissed within hours of the investigation, and he became the prime suspect. As the police uncovered more physical evidence at the scene of the crime and interacted further with Carlo, doubts about his mental health began to emerge. Who was Christina Lissy? Let's start this narrative by introducing its main characters. Christina Lissy, born Christina Omas, came into the world on September 17, 1975, in the small northern Italian town of Pavia, becoming the eldest child in her family. From a young age, she exhibited a strong-willed, independent, and highly ambitious nature, always marching to the beat of her own drum. She possessed leadership qualities and was constantly striving to excel in whatever she undertook, whether it was her schoolwork, performances in the drama club, or any day-to-day activities. Christina was someone who always had a wide circle of friends, thanks to her excellent organizational skills and the ability to lead. After finishing high school, she was accepted into a prestigious university in Milan and soon moved out of her parents' home to start an independent life. Despite this, she maintained a close relationship with her family, staying in constant touch, and her parents knew they could always rely on their eldest daughter. At the age of 19, while still attending university, Christina took a job at a branch of a major Italian insurance company located in Mata Visconti. She quickly earned the respect of her superiors and colleagues, and her career was on a fast track to success. Upon graduation, she had a wide array of opportunities before her. But instead of moving to a big city, Omas chose to stay closer to home in the countryside. By this time, she had already received a promotion at work and assumed a managerial position, becoming a leading specialist in the field of civil insurance. However, even as she grew into an adult and a successful woman, Christina never gave up her youthful passion for theater. She dedicated all her spare time to rehearsals and performing on stage, particularly enjoying musical productions due to her strong voice and impeccable musical ear. In Mata Visconti, she had her admirers and was sometimes even recognized on the streets. Yet Christina's personal life didn't seem to fall into place as smoothly. She had many suitors and occasional romances, but most of the men she encountered seemed frivolous, unreliable, and unsuitable for a serious relationship or family life. She held on to the belief that she would eventually find her true love and achieve happiness. Carlo Lissy, the unassuming psychopath. Carlo Lissy entered the world in the fall of 1982 in the Italian commune of Casarano as the eldest of two sons in his family. The family patriarch held conservative views, was quite strict, and even harsh with his children. Carlo's younger brother quickly became the parents' darling, constantly pampered and protected, while they demanded unquestioning obedience, stellar academic performance, and high achievements from their firstborn. From childhood, Carlo strived to meet his parents' expectations, always acting as instructed. He excelled academically, participated in volleyball, a sport his father chose for him despite Carlo's passion for soccer, and never argued with his father, who often stated that his house operated solely on his rules. It was easy to upset or anger their father, who became terrifying when enraged, so Carlo made it a point never to contradict him, always enviously observing his father's and mother's more affectionate treatment towards his younger brother. As a teenager, Carlo became nervous and withdrawn, dreaming of doing something on his own, yet fearing his father's wrath. His fears, internal struggles, and self-doubt affected his relationships with peers. Carlo had almost no friends at school, where he was seen as an uninteresting nerd, often openly bullied without the ability to defend himself, as his father had crushed his self-esteem and suppressed any desire to assert himself. Over time, Carlo learned to adapt and blend in. He avoided conflicts, tried to merge with the crowd, and was superficially polite and kind, even to those he despised. It seemed Carlo had lost his own emotions, or perhaps never had them, laughing or mourning with others, but his emotional responses always remained shallow because he never truly felt those emotions. Another trait of Carlo was his skill in dodging uncomfortable questions. He wasn't a pathological liar, but knew how to prevaricate and evade with such an impassive demeanor that it seemed he was speaking the truth. People who knew Carlo personally later recalled his diminished capacity for empathy. He could be described as callous and indifferent to the troubles and sorrows of others, including those close to him. After finishing school, Lissi enrolled in a prestigious university's economics faculty, chosen by his father, despite Carlo's disinterest in economics or working with numbers. But his opinion was never sought, and he couldn't challenge his father's decision. Thus, Carlo was accustomed to acting against his own interests just to meet others' expectations. Carlo was quite handsome and knew how to use it to his advantage. His youthful sports activities and regular gym visits in adulthood made him even more attractive. Coupled with some charm and superficial charisma, Carlo could be described as a real looker with a dazzling smile and athletic build. People often admired his looks, leading to excessive self-love and clinical narcissism. Lissi easily initiated flings with women, but was incapable of engaging in serious, long-term relationships. First, he tried to avoid any responsibility. Second, he had no interest in making long-term plans, simply going with the flow. And third, his partners soon realized he was emotionally shallow and devoid of real attachment, leading them often to initiate the breakup. Even after university, the young man continued living with his parents, showing no desire to start an independent life, let alone a family of his own. Meanwhile, he secured a job at a leading IT company in Milan. Carlo earned a good salary and faced broad prospects, but remained dissatisfied with his career. However, his parents were overjoyed, and his father seemed proud of his eldest son for the first time, so Carlo was too afraid to disappoint him, preferring to avoid conflicts and criticism. But soon, a good job and career achievements weren't enough. His parents increasingly pressured him to marry and provide them with grandchildren. Aware of his numerous fleeting affairs and his inability to maintain serious relationships, these discussions often led to arguments at home. As Carlo always tried to avoid confrontations, he assured them he would soon find a wife and start a family. Carlo and Cristina Lissi, a love story. Carlo first laid eyes on Cristina during her performance in a musical play on stage, where he was utterly captivated by her powerful charisma and stunning vocal talent. Despite his immediate fascination, he lacked the courage to approach her after the show. However, fate intervened a few weeks later when mutual friends introduced them. At the time of their meeting, Carlo was only 23, while Cristina had already turned 30. Despite the significant age difference, they quickly developed a romantic relationship. Cristina, who had previously focused mainly on her career, found herself unexpectedly wanting to build a family and have children with Carlo. He was handsome, career-oriented, and intelligent. Cristina perceived his hesitancy, dependency, noticeable selfishness, and some emotional coldness as traits that could be mended. She took the initiative in their relationship, with Carlo compliantly following her lead. Just a few months into the relationship, Omas introduced Carlo to her family. Cristina's parents, however, were not pleased with her choice. They saw her suitor as frivolous, with Cristina's mother describing him as a child in a man's body. She believed her daughter needed a more emotionally mature partner who could be a reliable support, not this immature young man. Cristina, however, disagreed and decided to follow her heart, as she always had. Conversely, Carlo's parents were thrilled with his choice. Cristina was seen as an adult, wise, self-sufficient, and accomplished woman who could take care of herself and their indecisive, somewhat irresponsible son. The head of the family, who was not easily pleased, was particularly delighted, convincing Carlo further that he had made the right decision. In quiet waters. About a year after meeting, the young couple moved in together and started actively planning their wedding. Carlo was quiet and compliant, always listening to his fiancée, never contradicting her, and carefully avoiding domestic disputes. Christina made all the decisions while her chosen partner silently supported them. This arrangement suited her perfectly. She was confident that a long and happy life awaited them. However, just before their wedding, Carlo revealed his true nature for the first time, nearly causing them to split. Before the wedding, Carlo's friends threw him a bachelor party in one of Milan's popular nightclubs. They drank, had fun, and were having a great time when a group of women joined them. One of them showed a keen interest in the groom-to-be, trying her best to seduce him. His inebriated friends immediately egged him on, suggesting that a fleeting affair with the stranger would be the perfect adventure to bid farewell to his bachelor life. Without much thought, the guy went off to a hotel with the woman where they spent a passionate night. The next morning, unexpectedly, Carlo confessed his love to the casual lover and promised to leave his fiancée for her. That same day, he confessed everything to Christina, stating he had fallen for someone else and no longer wanted the wedding. Christina handled the news with dignity, packed her belongings, and decided to move back to her parents' house temporarily while finding her own place. But when Carlo's father learned about his son's actions and that the engagement with Christina was broken off by his initiative, he was furious. He declared he didn't want to see his heir until he apologized to the bride-to-be and convinced her to marry him again. Once again, Carlo submitted to his father's will. After buying a huge bouquet of flowers, he headed to the Omas residence. Christina's parents opposed him. They had disliked this peculiar young man even before the news of his infidelity and the broken engagement, and now they certainly didn't want to see him. But the final decision was Christina's to make. After some thought, she decided to forgive her fiancé and give him another chance. The wedding and Mr. Lissy's double life. The wedding took place as planned, and the money gifted by relatives was invested in buying their own home in Mata Visconti. Initially, their marital life seemed quite blissful. Both held high-ranking positions with substantial salaries, affording them not just the necessities, but also travel, entertainment, and more. In 2009, they welcomed their first child, a daughter named Julia, and in 2013, Christina gave birth to a son, Gabriel. To the outside world, they appeared as a happy family, full of love and understanding. Carlo seemed to do everything to please his wife, not out of deep love or respect, but rather to avoid disputes. Christina was content with their life together, oblivious to the double life her husband led. At home, he was the exemplary family man, spending time with his wife and kids. Yet in Milan, where Carlo commuted daily for work, he transformed entirely. He frequently engaged in flings and casual encounters, meeting women in cafes, shopping centers, or even on the street. The handsome, stylishly dressed man in his expensive car almost always received reciprocated interest, but these affairs typically ended after a few dates. Carlo enjoyed the control and dominance in these short-term relationships, deciding when to see his next conquest and when to leave her. At home, Christina held the reins, with Carlo merely following her lead. However, rumors of his escapades eventually reached Christina. Each time she confronted him, Carlo swore it was all lies and slander. In 2013, shortly after the birth of their second child, Carlo seriously considered leaving his family for one of his mistresses, to the point of admitting his intentions to his wife. Christina countered with compelling arguments against their separation, particularly highlighting how it would upset his parents. Carlo had no choice but to concede to her reasoning, new love, and a horrific plan to escape marital ties. A year later, in early 2014, a new employee named Maria, young and attractive, joined Carlo's workplace. He fell for her instantly, unable to think of anyone else. He tried everything to catch her attention, giving small gifts, complimenting her, and asking her out repeatedly. However, Maria was clear about not wanting to engage with a married co-worker who had 2 children. But Carlo, persistent in his pursuit, seemed to ignore her protests and didn't think of giving up. Moreover, Carlo began to blame his family for his unhappiness, believing his wife and children were obstacles to his personal joy. He convinced himself he had never been happy in his marriage, or in life for that matter. But with Maria, he imagined he could have the perfect relationship. If only he wasn't bound by his marital ties and responsibilities as a father. The more he dwelled on this thought, the darker his contemplations became. Carlo broached the subject of divorce again, but his wife once more convinced him it was a bad idea, and he found no arguments to counter hers. Frustrated, he started looking online for divorce lawyers, but realized after a few consultations that he would have to surrender half of his assets to Christina and also pay child support. Unwilling to accept such an outcome, he began researching how to end a person's life quickly and without arousing suspicion. Delving into various criminal stories, Carlo stumbled upon an article about an armed robbery that had occurred a few years prior in Mata Visconti. The robbers had fatally stabbed the homeowner before fleeing with the loot, remaining undetected to this day. A monstrous plan took shape in Carlo's mind, to recreate a similar robbery scenario, but this time the intended victims would be the mother and children. The last day of the Lissi family. The last day for Christina and the children was Friday, June 13th, 2014. Carlo had the day off and spent it with his family, giving them a farewell party, so to speak. They went to an amusement park together, then went to the mall for shopping, and spent the evening at a popular local cafe. The man did his best to make sure that as many people as possible saw him and his family that day, and everyone noticed how happy they were. After returning home, the couple put the children to bed in their rooms on the second floor and went downstairs to the living room where they made love. It was part of Carlo's cunning plan to avert suspicion. He knew that the examination would establish the fact that he and Christina had consensual intimacy, and who would think that after that a man would suddenly take the life of his wife and children? The woman knew that her husband was going to watch soccer with friends and assumed that he went to get dressed, and she herself settled down in the living room at the TV. But Carlo at that time went to the kitchen, where he took a large knife and stealthily crept up to his wife from behind. He stabbed her in the side of the neck, but Christina not only remained conscious, but also rushed to escape. Apparently, she did not immediately realize who had attacked her, and when she turned around and saw her distraught husband with a knife in his hand, she was shocked. The victim tried to defend herself and dislodged the knife, causing the man's hand to slip and injuring his palm. Despite her efforts, the strength disparity was too great. Carlo continued his assault until Christina showed no signs of life. She died without understanding why her loved one could commit such a horrific act. Then, Carlo went upstairs and cut the throats of his sleeping 5-year-old daughter and his 18-month-old son. Experts later concluded that the children likely did not suffer and probably didn't even wake up. Neighbors, some of whom heard loud screams, did not call the police, thinking the noise quickly subsided. Had they been more vigilant, the children's lives might have been saved. After completing the deed, Carlo clumsily staged a robbery, slightly moving and scattering items, erased his fingerprints from the weapon, cleaned the floor where he had stepped in fresh blood, and then went to a rarely used basement shower to wash off the blood. However, he inexplicably put back on the same underwear, which had small blood splatters unnoticed by him in the moment of the attack. Following this, the perpetrator bandaged his cut hand, dressed up, and casually went to a sports bar to watch football and drink beer with friends. He behaved naturally, and his friends, later testifying in court, could not fathom that he had just committed a triple homicide against his own family. Towards the end of the match, Carlo sent a couple of messages to his wife's phone, updating her on the score and professing his love, adding that he would be home soon. He returned around 3 a.m. and staged a dramatic discovery of the crime, making several critical mistakes. Firstly, he recorded the scene on his phone's camera, intending to create an alibi by pretending to discover the disorder and then the body of his wife, before running outside in panic. His second mistake was failing to turn off the camera, resulting in footage that completely contradicted his alibi and testimony. Investigation and evidence. Carlo's initial claim of a robbery was quickly dismissed in the early hours of the investigation, following the crime scene examination. Doors and windows were intact, indicating that the perpetrator had unrestricted access to the house. Nothing of value, nor anything at all, was missing despite money and Christina's jewelry box being in plain sight. The disorder appeared staged, with items merely toppled or displaced rather than searched through. Most importantly, there was no logical reason for robbers to harm the children sleeping upstairs in their beds. Thus, the case was swiftly reclassified as a deliberate act of ending lives. Carlo, becoming the prime suspect immediately, gave inconsistent statements and couldn't clearly explain the fresh cut on his palm. When he was taken into custody and his clothing was sent for analysis, experts quickly found tiny blood splatters on them. However, Carlo claimed the blood must have come from when he attempted to revive his family members, yet the stains were too small and located on the back of his clothing, suggesting they could only have originated from the knife's motion during the act. Regarding the video Carlo provided to the authorities, it clearly showed that he didn't approach his wife's body to check for a pulse or go upstairs to the children, but ran outside immediately and didn't return. Despite this, he claimed his family was no longer alive and knew for certain all three were ended with a knife. The discovery of a bloodied cloth in the trash, which the culprit used to clean up, was the final piece of damning evidence. A psychopath, but is he sane? After the man was arrested, all his attempts to feign grief ceased. He became calm and unconcerned, and once in his cell, he simply went to sleep. Carlo felt no guilt or remorse, no pity for his own children or his wife, but he continued to insist on his own innocence, despite the fact that all the evidence was against him. A search history had been reconstructed on the killer's seized laptop, giving the investigation an insight into exactly when Lissy began planning to kill his family. There was now no doubt that it was a premeditated crime, but as yet the motive remained unclear. When the man realized that there was no point in denying, he began to confess, telling how exactly he got rid of his loved ones. But the answer to the main question shocked everyone. Explaining the motives for his action, he said that he could not just divorce Christine, because then they would have to share a lot of jointly acquired property, including the house, cars, and the family bank account, and he was not satisfied with this. In addition, there would be a burden in the form of 2 children who would have to pay child support. And all this, according to Carlo, would interfere with their happy life with Maria, for which, in fact, he decided to commit a crime. About all this, the murderer spoke quite calmly and indifferently. That he is a psychopath, no one has no doubt, but it was unclear whether this man is sane. The psychiatric examination established that Lissy was aware of his actions and fully realized what he was doing, but he did not feel any remorse either at the time of the crime or afterwards. In January 2015, Carlo was sentenced to life in prison. He listened to the judge's verdict indifferently, noting only that he thought so. Sometime later, the man tried to file an appeal, but soon withdrew it himself, saying that it was all useless. Finally, Lissy's father died of a heart attack shortly after his son was convicted and sent to prison. He simply could not accept the fact that he had raised a real monster, devoid of a sense of pity and remorse. Hey guys, today we're diving into another truly horrifying case. If you want to support my channel, make sure to subscribe and stay active. It really helps me out. I'd be super grateful for that. Let's get started. At around 2 o'clock in the morning, Houston police officers enter a 2-story house on Palmetto Street. In the yard, they find 2 teenagers, a young man and a young woman, standing under a street lamp. They say nothing. The young woman is visibly shaken, her eyes puffy and watery, while the young man remains calm, his gaze distant. The officers do not ask questions. One of them asks to turn off the alarm system. The young man lifts his head and presses a button on the keypad. The house gives no sense of a crime scene. Outside, it's silent. Inside, everything is neat. Orderly. Not a sound. No signs of disturbance or chaos. The officers climb to the second floor. Tension mounts with every step. One of the doors is slightly ajar. From within, they hear labored breathing. No shouting or movement. Just a raspy rhythm interrupted by occasional inhales. They enter the bedroom. The light is off. Right away, their eyes are drawn to the pillows, tightly draped over the heads of two individuals lying on the bed. No reaction to the intrusion. When an officer lifts the pillow covering the woman, he immediately steps back. She is deceased. There are 2 gunshot wounds to the head. Dried, darkened blood has seeped into the pillowcase. She isn't breathing. The man next to her is alive. Barely. He doesn't respond to verbal prompts, doesn't open his eyes. He has a gunshot wound to the head, but not through and through. He's conscious, though unable to speak. When medics arrive later, they'll describe his condition as critical. No weapon is visible. The room remains orderly. There's only a small hole in the ceiling and a darkening stain on the wall. No alarm sounds, no signs of aggressive behavior elsewhere in the house. Downstairs, it's just as quiet. Outside stand 2 minors, one of whom is the son of the victims. He's already said everything he thinks he should, but as it turns out later, not all of his statements match what the officers find inside the house. A pause hangs in the air, and with it, the first suspicions begin to form. Antonio Armstrong was born in Houston when his mother, Kay Winston, was just 15. Soon after, she married a man who already had 5 kids from a previous relationship. In their new blended family, Kay gave birth to 3 more children. Despite the challenges, she did her best to treat everyone equally. The family held firm to Christian values. Faith was central to their lives. From childhood, Antonio showed remarkable athletic talents. After graduating high school in Houston, he enrolled at the University of Texas and joined their football team. His mother supported him at every game. After college, he was signed by the Miami Dolphins, then continued his professional career in Canada, playing for the British Columbia Lions and later the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. Injuries eventually ended his pro sports career, and he returned to Houston. From a young age, Antonio was deeply involved in church life. After his athletic career came to an end, he became an assistant pastor at the same congregation he had grown up in. It was there he met Dawn, a devoted and respected member of the community who actively participated in church activities. On July 14, 1998, they got married. Together, they not only built a family, but also launched a fitness business called First Class Training. Over time, they opened 3 gyms across Houston. Antonio also started a YouTube channel where he shared motivational videos. Before marrying Antonio, Dawn already had a son named Joshua, known to everyone as Josh. He was outgoing, kind, and athletic. Antonio legally adopted him and raised him as his own. The couple later welcomed a second son, Antonio Jr., or AJ, followed by their youngest daughter, Kira. AJ was calm and physically active from an early age. His parents introduced him to sports young, and he followed in his father's footsteps, finding success on his high school football team. His childhood was shaped by discipline and strong faith-based values. Though Josh and AJ were stepbrothers, they referred to each other simply as brothers. Kira, the youngest, grew up in a more stable and financially secure environment. By 2016, Dawn and Antonio were living with AJ and Kira in a home on Palmetto Street in Houston. Their older son, Josh, who was 20 at the time, had moved into a rental just 2 minutes away. He was attending the Art Institute of Houston and hoped to pursue a music career. AJ, then 16, was a high school student preparing to move into upper-level classes. Kira, age 12, had just started middle school. All 3 children, including Josh, stayed in close contact with their grandmother, Kay, visiting her several times a week. To the outside world, the Armstrongs appeared to be the picture of a successful family. No one could have imagined that just months later, a crime would take place inside that very home, one that would forever change the lives of those who survived. Faith played a central role in the Armstrong household. The family regularly attended church services and actively participated in parish life. At home, there was a strong sense of order. Dawn maintained a tight daily schedule. She monitored schoolwork, set bedtimes, managed meals, and organized her children's free time. Each had responsibilities around the house. Late arrivals, secrecy, and missed classes were strictly unacceptable. Antonio took a keen interest in his son's academic progress and physical training, believing that sports built character. In elementary school, AJ was polite, diligent, and well-behaved. But over time, signs of struggle emerged. Tardiness, missed assignments, and minor behavioral issues began to appear. Josh, the older son, visited less often. His communication with the younger siblings became selective. Though Dawn and Antonio never outwardly distinguished between their biological and stepchildren, their interactions with Josh grew increasingly formal. He sensed emotional distance from his stepfather, didn't share the family's religious beliefs, and sought greater independence. Kyra, the youngest daughter, received special attention from her mother. Her upbringing was strict, but full of care. Dawn maintained control over everything, from schoolwork to her social interactions. The parents frequently checked their children's phones, read through messages, and tracked their locations. Any suspicion of broken rules led to consequences. The household operated under full parental oversight, from homework to weekend activities. Dawn kept notes on AJ's behavior in her phone and regularly discussed strategies with Antonio to manage their son. After the discovery of the Armstrong couple in their upstairs bedroom, investigators began a full sweep of the house. Particular focus was placed on any signs of forced entry, but none were found. All windows were closed, glass unbroken, and the locks intact. Both the front and back doors showed no signs of tampering. The home was equipped with a security system connected to Dawn's cell phone, which logged each arming and disarming event, as well as any door activity. That night, the system was armed at approximately 12:52 a.m. and disarmed at exactly 1:40 a.m., the same time a call was made to emergency services. This timeline indicated that no suspicious activity occurred between those times. No doors or windows had been open. Investigators concluded that only someone inside the house or someone with the access code could have disabled the system. There were no reports of any visitors that night, and no one in the family had given out spare keys. On the first floor, officers noticed that a drawer in the kitchen, where a Smith & Wesson .22 caliber handgun was usually stored, had been pulled all the way open. The drawer was empty, which could have indicated haste or a staged scene. Later, the gun was found in a downstairs closet near the staircase. Next to it was a torn piece of paper with a message written in French. "I've been watching you for a long time. Follow me." The handwriting was shaky, the letters slanted, and there were no fingerprints. The paper itself was ordinary, no watermark or identifying marks. Authorities were unable to confirm who had written it. Investigators also noted a strange mark on the ceiling of AJ's third-floor room, a bullet hole that appeared to have been fired upward through the ceiling. Based on the angle and trajectory, the shot seemed to have been fired at close range. However, the circumstances remained unclear. The bullet itself was never recovered. The house was also equipped with motion sensors, which tracked movement between floors. According to the log, after 1:24 a.m., the only activity recorded was on the second floor near the parents' bedroom. No movement was detected on the third floor, where the children's rooms were located. This conflicted with AJ's account, in which he claimed he went downstairs after hearing the gunshots to find out what happened. His reported movements and timing weren't supported by the system's records. Kira showed officers her room and explained that she had been awakened by a loud noise, but stayed in bed, not going near the door or leaving her room. AJ told police he had hidden in a closet on the 3rd floor and stayed there until the officers arrived. He also claimed to have seen a masked figure leaving the parents' bedroom and heading downstairs. However, this alleged sighting wasn't supported by any footage, alarm records, or surveillance systems. A K9 unit was brought in to detect any unfamiliar scents that might indicate an intruder. The dog found no foreign human scent trails leading from the front or back entrances. All confirmed movement was confined inside the house. The gap between the last recorded activity and the system being turned off was less than 15 minutes. In that time, if the perpetrator was not someone living there, they would have had to enter the home, commit the act, and leave, without triggering any alarms or leaving a trace. This raised critical questions. Physically, entry into the home could only have happened if the security system had been deactivated from the inside. The question of who had the means and reason to do that remained unanswered. The day after the incident, 16-year-old Antonio Armstrong Jr. was brought to the police station to give a statement. Since he was a minor, the interview was conducted in the presence of his grandmother, Kay, as required by law. The recorded footage from that session would later become a key piece in the investigation. From the very beginning, AJ's behavior drew the attention of detectives. During questioning, AJ repeated the phrase, "I didn't do it," 19 times, despite not being directly accused of anything at that point. His tone was calm, almost detached. At times, he appeared distracted and failed to focus on important details. Officers noted that not once did he ask about the condition of his parents or express concern about what had happened to them. During a second round of questioning, his demeanor remained the same. He showed no visible signs of shock, didn't ask to contact any family members, and never inquired about funeral arrangements. According to the officers, he came across as emotionally disconnected. His words and behavior didn't align with how most people would expect a teenager to react after losing both parents in a violent attack. Although AJ wasn't detained after the interview and no formal charges were filed, he immediately became a central figure in the case. Investigators began compiling information about his behavior, social circle, and any signs of tension with his parents. While physical evidence was being processed, AJ's statements became the first element that didn't align with the broader timeline of events. As his academic discipline began to slip, AJ also started to hide things from his parents. He used 2 phones, one known to his family and another he had purchased without their knowledge. Through the second phone, he communicated with a girlfriend whose relationship was not approved by the family. Dawn didn't know the girl personally, considered the relationship inappropriate, and attempted to limit their contact by monitoring his messages and blocking certain apps. During a search of AJ's room after the incident, police found a marijuana wrapper hidden in his underwear drawer. On his phone, investigators discovered text messages where he discussed the use and purchase of banned substances, along with saved photos of homemade cigarettes and chats with friends. These findings contradicted the image of a respectful and obedient teen and revealed a side of his life that his parents either didn't know about or chose not to acknowledge. A few months before the tragedy, there was an incident involving his father's car. One day, while his parents were away, AJ took his father's white Infiniti without permission. The car was later found with damage from hitting a curb. The repairs were costly, but the family decided to keep the matter private. Antonio sat down for a serious conversation with his son and began considering whether to transfer AJ to a different school or send him to live with his grandmother to instill better discipline. Tension within the family continued to build. AJ increasingly viewed the strict household rules as overwhelming. In the weeks leading up to the tragedy, there were several intense arguments between him and Dawn. In private conversations with friends, AJ described the control at home as suffocating and invasive. His lifestyle choices began to drift further from his parents' expectations. As the restrictions piled up, so did the internal pressure. Later, investigators would consider this dynamic as one of the possible contributing factors behind a decision that ultimately altered the course of the entire family's life. Josh Armstrong's lifestyle was also very different from the structure maintained in the household. His time in college was turbulent. He repeatedly dropped out and re-enrolled. Ongoing personal struggles impacted his mental well-being. Dawn made efforts to stay in touch with him, but her role had been reduced to long-distance oversight. During the investigation, it came to light that Josh had been struggling with anxiety, depression, and paranoid episodes. He had received treatment at medical facilities, and doctors' notes revealed that during acute phases, he experienced auditory hallucinations, panic attacks, and episodes of detachment from reality. One psychiatric report mentioned an obsessive fear of being monitored through electronic devices. He was diagnosed with a severe mental health condition that required ongoing medication. 2 months before the crime, a significant incident occurred. Josh attempted to start a fire in the family home. According to police and medical reports, he lit a blanket on fire near the entrance. The flames were quickly extinguished. After this, Dawn took him to a hospital for a mental health evaluation. He was prescribed antipsychotic medication, but no one monitored whether he was actually taking it. Testimonies from Kira and their grandmother Kay confirmed that Josh would occasionally show up near the house, acting oddly and avoiding conversation. He was not involved in AJ's life and didn't express any interest in his affairs. After the fire, the family avoided talking about the situation. Dawn chose not to file a formal report, opting instead to handle it privately. Despite his background, Josh was not a focus of the investigation in the early days following the crime. He wasn't questioned during the initial inquiries. No reports mention a formal interview. Moreover, he was never fingerprinted, had no DNA samples collected, and his whereabouts on the night of the incident were not verified. This later raised serious questions from the defense. Kay told investigators that on the day of the crime, Josh appeared distant and silent. He didn't show concern or ask questions about what had happened. According to her, he just sat in the chair, staring at the wall and saying nothing. She attempted to speak with him, but he gave short answers and avoided engagement. Josh's medical history also included notes about prior episodes of aggressive behavior. He had been placed under outpatient observation twice due to thoughts of self-harm and high levels of anxiety. In both instances, doctors recommended constant supervision and medication, but each time, communication with the facility ended shortly after his release. One of the lingering questions in the case was whether he had any connection to the events that unfolded in the home. Given his physical proximity to the scene, the previous fire incident, and a diagnosed condition with known risk factors, it would seem reasonable for him to at least have been treated as a witness. Yet the investigation focused almost exclusively on AJ, overlooking a potentially unstable family member who had access to the home, understood the family's routines, and had shown dangerous behavior in the past. 7 years after Antonio and Dawn Armstrong lost their lives, a new piece of evidence emerged, presented by the prosecution as a critical link implicating AJ. It involved a drop of blood, reportedly belonging to his father, found on a t-shirt collected from the crime scene back in 2016. However, the circumstances surrounding this discovery raised more questions than answers. AJ's clothing had been bagged by police on the day of the incident and sealed in a labeled, transparent evidence bag. According to protocol, the items were visually inspected in 2016 and no blood traces were noted at the time. For several years, the clothing was not sent for forensic testing. Only in 2023, just ahead of a third attempt at trial, did an officer reviewing the case file report a suspicious mark under the tag on the t-shirt packaging. Upon re-examination under lab conditions, a small brownish-red spot was indeed found underneath the original label that had been affixed over part of the fabric. Forensic analysis revealed that the substance contained DNA matching the profile of Antonio Armstrong Sr. The trace was tiny, about 2 millimeters in size, but its presence was used as a basis to reopen the charges. However, the defense immediately questioned the credibility of this discovery. First, why hadn't this crucial piece of evidence, one that could dramatically alter the direction of the case, been documented earlier? Second, how could blood end up on the inside of the shirt, beneath a police evidence tag that had reportedly been placed there at the time of collection? That sequence of events seemed illogical. According to official protocol, the evidence bag had not been opened until 2023. That meant the only way the blood could have ended up under the label was if it had been there from the beginning. But then why had it gone unnoticed by investigators, forensic technicians, and attorneys during prior reviews of the material? Moreover, the label itself was factory type, with clean edges and firm adhesion to the fabric. There were no signs it had been tampered with or removed. The discovery of this trace so many years later sparked speculation that it may have been planted. AJ's attorneys emphasized that after 2 failed trials, the prosecution had run out of new arguments. And then, just before the 3rd trial, a new piece of evidence appeared that had never been mentioned in any original reports. The defense called for an independent analysis. They also requested all storage facility logs to trace the chain of custody for the evidence bag over the course of those 7 years. Concerns were also raised about the conditions in which the evidence had been stored. Some items, including the clothing, were temporarily moved between departments, and responsibility for maintaining their security had shifted several times. A complete set of documentation confirming the bag's integrity was never produced. Prosecutors claimed this was simply a technical oversight and that the evidence remained untouched. During the investigation, it was determined that the blood trace was located on the inside of the shirt near the collar, around the chest area. The prosecution argued that AJ was close to his father at the moment the shot was fired, and the drop could have landed on his shirt if he had leaned over or stood nearby. However, technical analysis failed to provide a clear answer as to how, when, or by what means the biological material ended up on the garment. Despite the uncertainty surrounding this piece of evidence, it became the cornerstone of the prosecution's case during the 3rd trial. The story of the blood trace under the label became a turning point. Each side interpreted it differently. The prosecution called it a breakthrough, while the defense saw it as a sign of systemic failure. A new dimension of conflict emerged. Beyond guilt or innocence, the case now called into question the reliability of the procedures upon which the entire justice system is supposed to stand. The criminal case against A.J. Armstrong became one of the longest running in Harris County. The trial process stretched over several years and involved 3 separate court proceedings. Each one was followed closely by the public and marked by intense debates between the prosecution and defense. The first trial took place in 2019, 3 years after the crime. Prosecutors argued that the act was committed from inside the house and that AJ was the only person with both access and opportunity. However, the defense emphasized the lack of direct evidence linking AJ to the crime. The firearm did not contain his fingerprints, there was no blood found on his clothing at the time, and law enforcement had not fully investigated the possible involvement of Josh, the older brother. The proceedings sparked intense public debate, but the jury was unable to reach a unanimous verdict. The trial ended without a resolution. The second trial occurred in 2022. Both sides presented essentially the same evidence, but with slightly different emphasis. The prosecution leaned more heavily on AJ's illogical behavior, applying emotional pressure in court. The defense reiterated that the investigation was one-sided and that a potentially unstable relative, Josh, had been largely overlooked. Just like before, the jury was divided and the case once again ended in a mistrial. The third trial was held in 2023. By then, a new piece of evidence had surfaced, a drop of blood said to belong to Antonio Armstrong Sr. It became the cornerstone of the prosecution's argument. Prosecutors claimed the presence of blood pointed to AJ being in close proximity to the victim at the time of the incident. They also provided details from the security system and motion detectors, stating that no one else could have physically committed the crime without disabling the system from inside the house. The defense, on the other hand, accused investigators of manipulating the case. But this time, despite ongoing disagreements, the jury returned a verdict: guilty. It was only after the third attempt that A.J. Armstrong was found guilty of committing the crime against his parents. The court sentenced him to life in prison with the possibility of parole. In the U.S. criminal justice system, a person can only be convicted if the prosecution proves guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, a foundational principle in American law. Reasonable doubt means that if jurors have any justifiable uncertainty regarding the defendant's guilt, they must acquit. In A.J. Armstrong's case, that principle came into question. There was no direct evidence tying A.J. to the crime. The weapon, his father's gun, carried no fingerprints from A.J. There were no signs of a struggle at the scene, and the blood allegedly found on A.J.'s shirt wasn't discovered until 7 years later. The prosecution's main argument centered on his behavior after the incident and statements that were seen as inconsistent. Investigators overlooked potentially important details. Not all biological traces in the house were examined, fingerprint analysis on doors wasn't conducted, and windows were not checked for microfragments that could indicate forced entry. Portions of the alarm system's log were unavailable. Key data on movement between floors during the critical time was either corrupted or lost, and no independent forensic review was performed on those elements. Josh was never called to testify in court. His alibi was not verified, and the investigation never treated him as a potential suspect. This decision was never officially explained in any of the case documents. A note found near Dawn Armstrong's body also went unexamined. No forensic testing was done on the paper, handwriting, or possible DNA traces. No expert ever confirmed who might have left it. Yet, this piece of evidence was never used as a reason to broaden the investigation. Throughout all three trials, the same arguments were presented to the jury, without any new lines of inquiry or direct evidence. Instead, the focus remained on AJ's behavior, with emotional emphasis overshadowing the absence of irrefutable facts. The final decision was based on interpretation, not on undeniable proof. The concept of reasonable doubt exists to prevent judicial errors, especially when clear evidence is lacking. In A.J. Armstrong's case, his guilt was never fully proven, not by timing, not by physical evidence, and not by motive. Nevertheless, the court opted to close the case rather than acknowledge that doubt in itself is not a crime. Following the verdict, A.J. Armstrong didn't remain silent. From prison, he gave several interviews to journalists and independent creators, commenting on the charges, reflecting on his family, and sharing his perspective. He continues to maintain his innocence, stating that he would never harm his parents. In these interviews, A.J. described his family life as complicated but not hostile. He acknowledged having typical teenage conflicts with his parents over discipline and household rules, but emphasized that he looked up to his father and leaned on his mother for support. He insists he loved them and could never have done what he's been accused of. One of the core themes in his statements is a sharp criticism of the investigation. A.J. claims that detectives targeted him from the very beginning, disregarding alternative theories. He also expressed hope for a future appeal, stating he is willing to fight for his name, no matter how long it takes. AJ believes that justice can be served if the case is reconsidered without bias and with the help of independent experts. In one interview, he said that if his father had survived, he would have told the truth about what really happened. AJ firmly believes Antonio Sr. would have defended him, stood by his side, and prevented the family from being torn apart. That belief sounds like a final plea for trust. Kate met AJ after his arrest. Their relationship began during the investigation, and she knew exactly what she was getting into. Despite the accusations, she believed in his innocence. They started corresponding and later began visiting during court-approved visits. After several years, they got married. Their marriage was legally registered while AJ was still under court supervision between trials. A year after their wedding, they had a son. Kate is raising him on her own. All he knows about his father comes from photographs, brief phone calls, and short video messages AJ sends from prison. When the boy asks where his dad is, Kate answers honestly, "He's in a place he shouldn't be. But he loves us, and he's waiting for us." Kate says she lives in a constant state of waiting. Court dates, appeals, paperwork, attorneys, it's all part of her daily routine. She works, raises their son, responds to media inquiries, and prepares legal documents all at once. In interviews, she says she doesn't allow herself to get tired. In her words, if she gives up, AJ will remain stuck in the system forever. Her belief is what keeps both him and their family going. She admits that at first she had doubts, but the deeper she looked into the case, the more convinced she became that the prosecution's narrative was incomplete and the verdict unjust. Kate says that from the very beginning, she has felt the pressure. Public opinion is divided, and she regularly receives hostile messages accusing her of blind loyalty or trying to defend a criminal. She doesn't know how many more years this will take, but she's certain the truth will come out. According to her, the only real fear is doing nothing. Kate doesn't see herself as a victim. She sees herself as part of a story that isn't over yet. Her role, she says, is to make sure it doesn't end in silence. As long as AJ remains behind bars, she will keep waiting. Not because she has to, but because she believes. If you step away from the official version and remove the bias, one honest question remains. What if AJ really didn't pull the trigger? Who entered the house, disabled the alarm system, bypassed the children, and fired the fatal shots? Or was that person already inside? The most obvious alternative theory points to Joshua, the older brother. He was present at the house on the day of the crime, but he was never formally questioned, never tested, never brought to court. Why? From the first hours, investigators chose a single direction: a J. No real effort was made to explore other possibilities. When the justice system relies on assumptions instead of evidence, any doubt becomes a risk of wrongful conviction. The process lost sight of what matters most. Not the profile of a suspect, but whether anyone else had both motive and opportunity. Instead of a search for truth, the case became a matter of settling for the simplest explanation. Maybe he is guilty, but what if he's not? What if the evidence was mishandled, if something was planted, if the narrative was shaped before the facts were fully known? If any of those what-ifs are true, then this case remains unsolved, and dangerously so. Not because of its brutality, but because of what could be a serious mistake. AJ is serving a life sentence. But the quieter question still lingers. What if it wasn't him? Thanks for watching, everyone. Your support means a lot to me, and you can help my channel grow by hitting that like button, dropping a comment, and sharing this video. Your engagement really makes a difference. See you soon. Hey guys! Today we're diving into another truly horrifying case. If you want to support my channel, make sure to subscribe and stay active. It really helps me out. I'd be super grateful for that. Let's get started. Violent crimes tend to spark widespread public interest and quickly become surrounded by rumors and speculation. Investigations conducted in the immediate aftermath often have a higher chance of solving the case quickly. Close attention to details is crucial, but sometimes the most important clues come from the most unexpected places. In the spring of 2010, a small town in Illinois was shaken by the news of a brutal triple crime. The victims were 2 men and 1 woman, all members of the same family. The Kramer family was well off and well known in the local community, which led investigators to initially consider the possibility of a robbery that spiraled out of control. However, as the investigation unfolded, it became clear that the situation was far more complex, tangled, and unpredictable than anyone could have imagined. Lori and Jeffrey Kramer had known each other since high school, and for years they were close friends. By their senior year, a romance blossomed between them, and as soon as they turned 18, they got married and never looked back. Not long after tying the knot, the young couple decided to leave the chaos of the big city behind and settle down in a quiet town called Darien, located in DuPage County, Illinois, just southwest of Chicago, with a population of just over 20,000. In 1986, they welcomed their first child, a son they named Anthony. 2 years later, their daughter Angela was born. Then, in the early 90s, their youngest, Michael, joined the family. Each of them had been longed for, and they were raised with care and love. Lori and Jeffrey were devoted parents who ensured their children had everything they needed and access to quality education. Back in the mid-1980s, Jeffrey opened a small auto repair shop in Darien, where he worked on cars and motorcycles with his own 2 hands. He quickly earned a reputation as someone who could fix just about anything, and word about his skills spread fast throughout the area. The business grew steadily. Over the years, that little shop expanded into a large service center that attracted customers from all over the county. The Kramers eventually bought a spacious house in one of the town's safest and most sought-after neighborhoods. Each family member had their own vehicle, the kids attended top-tier schools, and they all had the freedom to pursue whatever paths they chose without pressure from their parents. Anthony, the oldest, was studying economics and dreamed of moving to Chicago. He valued his independence but decided not to move out. Instead, he transformed the basement into his private living space, designing and renovating it himself. It had its own bathroom, kitchen, and a large bedroom. The only access, however, was still through the main house. Angela was studying architecture and was also considering relocating to a bigger city, though she still lived at home for the time being. Michael had just graduated high school and planned to stay in Darien to work alongside his father. He had grown up helping out at the repair shop, loved working with vehicles, had a good grasp of how they worked, and hoped to carry on the family business. So, even as young adults, all 3 Kramer children continued to live under one roof with their parents. The Kramers were known as a close-knit and genuinely happy family. They rarely argued and were always there for one another. Neighbors described them as warm, approachable, and generous, always ready to lend a hand. From the outside, it looked like they had no enemies and were respected and well-liked by everyone around them. But things weren't as perfect as they seemed. On March 2nd, 2010, around 2:30 in the morning, emergency services in Darien received a frantic call from a young woman. She was whispering, begging for help, for herself and her loved ones. Her voice trembled with fear, and it was hard to make out what she was saying. As authorities later learned, the caller had hidden herself inside a closet and had no idea what exactly was happening in the house, only that she had heard gunshots, at least 10 of them. Her words were scattered, but she managed to give an address and urged the dispatcher to send help as quickly as possible. That address belonged to the Kramer family. When officers arrived on the scene, there were no more gunshots, but the lights inside the house were still on. The first thing they noticed was someone climbing out through a basement window. At first, it seemed like it might be the perpetrator trying to escape, but it turned out to be the Kramers' oldest son, Anthony. He had also heard the gunfire and stayed hidden, unsure of what to do next. When he heard the approaching sirens, he decided to get out, but was too afraid to go through the house, worried he might encounter the person responsible. So instead, he escaped through the basement window. Officers moved Anthony to a safe distance and asked him to wait while they searched the house. The front door hadn't been forced open, and once the officers stepped inside, they immediately found a man lying on the stairs in a large pool of blood. It was Jeffrey Kramer, the head of the household. He had been struck twice in the chest at close range and was already gone. Just above him, lying on the steps, was the body of his wife, Lori. She had sustained wounds to the abdomen and head and showed no signs of life. Farther down the hallway, near the open door to the garage, face down in another pool of blood, was a young man. It was Michael, the youngest of the Kramer sons. He had been shot 3 times in the back. When first responders reached him, he still had a faint pulse, but unfortunately, he didn't survive the trip to the hospital and passed away in the ambulance. Multiple bullet holes were visible in the wall near the stairs, and large caliber shell casings were scattered across the floor. In the living room, a window had been shattered, most likely how the intruder or intruders entered the home. But one major question remained. Where was the young woman who had made the emergency call? Was she safe? Was she even still alive? Angela was found upstairs, still hiding inside a closet, paralyzed by shock. She had to be escorted out of the house, walking past the bodies of her family members, and broke down completely. She screamed and sobbed uncontrollably. Before officers could speak with her, she needed medical attention. The only known witnesses were the 2 surviving members of the Kramer family, but neither was able to provide much information. Anthony had been in his basement apartment when the shooting started. He had left his phone upstairs in the living room, so he couldn't call for help. Terrified of running into the shooter, he stayed hidden until he heard police sirens. Angela had been asleep in her room when the attack began. At the sound of gunfire, she ran toward her parents' bedroom but didn't find them there. Then more shots rang out. She grabbed her phone, hid inside a closet, and called for help. She stayed hidden until officers found her. Neither sibling had seen who was behind the attack. They couldn't say how many people were involved or provide any kind of description. The crime scene had very few clues left behind, aside from the shell casings. From the very beginning, the investigation was already hitting a wall. Detectives had no choice but to start considering every possible lead, even the ones that seemed the least likely at first glance. The Kramer family was well off and widely known throughout town. Their home contained many valuable and high-end items, which naturally raised the possibility of a break-in gone wrong. At first glance, this seemed like the most likely motive behind the crime. However, the scene inside the house didn't match that theory. Nothing appeared to be missing. Jewelry boxes, luxury watches, and high-end electronics were all left untouched and clearly visible. There were no signs of the place being ransacked, and the family's safe hadn't even been approached. According to statements from the surviving family members, the intruder was in the house for no more than 3 to 5 minutes. In other words, whoever committed this act entered the home by breaking a window in the living room, opened fire, took the lives of the homeowners and their youngest son, and then quickly fled, without stealing a single item. The whole scene suggested a personal motive. It appeared that someone in the family may have been targeted specifically, or possibly all of them were. This led law enforcement to take a closer look at the surviving family members, Angela and Anthony. Though both were adults, they still lived at home and didn't seem heavily involved in work. Their lifestyle was comfortable, supported by the success of their father's business. But investigators had to consider whether tensions might have grown within the household, tensions strong enough to lead to tragedy. One theory proposed by detectives was that the older siblings, possibly feeling stuck in a small town, had decided to take control of the family's assets, including a considerable amount of savings and the business itself. In this scenario, they would plan to sell the house and the auto shop, split the proceeds, and move on. Michael could have stood in the way, not only because he wanted to stay and work with his father, but also because fewer heirs meant a larger share for those left behind. As shocking as it sounded, that theory was eventually dismissed. Both Anthony and Angela were visibly devastated, deeply grieving the loss of their family. More importantly, the police suddenly received new information from someone who was not only a potential witness, but also became a key figure in the case. As the investigation was already in full swing, with officers examining the scene, interviewing the surviving relatives, and canvassing for any witnesses, a young woman approached the Kramer residence. She was visibly shaken, crying, and desperately asking about Michael. She said she had something important to report and that she had been in the house when everything happened. Her name was Samantha. She had just turned 19 and was Michael's girlfriend. The two had been high school sweethearts, and their relationship dated back to their teenage years. Their families supported them, and the couple had even begun talking about getting engaged in the near future. On the night of the incident, the Kramers had invited Samantha over for a family dinner. They enjoyed the evening together, and Samantha decided to stay the night with her boyfriend. Around 11 p.m., Jeffrey and Lori headed off to bed. Not long after, Angela and Anthony also went to their rooms. Michael and Samantha stayed behind in the living room, planning to watch a movie. But during the film, the two dozed off together on the couch. Around 2:30 in the morning, Samantha was jolted awake by the loud crash of shattering glass. At first, she didn't fully grasp what was happening and even thought the sound might have come from the movie they had been watching. Michael woke up too. The two looked around in confusion and saw a dark figure entering through a broken window. Samantha couldn't give any kind of description of the intruder. The person was dressed head to toe in black and wore a mask that completely hid their face. Suddenly, the unknown individual pulled out a handgun and fired in their direction while they were still sitting on the couch, frozen in fear. The bullet struck the wall near them. That was the moment they realized they had to run. They rushed toward the nearest exit, the door leading to the garage. Michael pushed it open and, shielding his girlfriend with his body, urged her through the doorway. That's when he was shot 3 times in the back at close range. But the few seconds he stood in the doorway were enough for Samantha to make it outside and take off running. In a state of shock, she believed Michael was right behind her and didn't immediately notice he wasn't. She ran several blocks without looking back, convinced the perpetrator was chasing her. Eventually, she stopped on a deserted street and looked around. No one was there. Her phone was still back in the Kramers' living room, so she tried to get help by knocking on the door of the first house she came across. But either the residents were away or asleep, because no one answered. Then she heard footsteps approaching. Terrified that the person behind the attack was following her, she crawled beneath a porch and hid. She stayed there for about an hour, too shaken to move. Eventually, still in shock, she decided to go back to Michael's house. From a distance, Samantha saw flashing red and blue lights from police cruisers and hurried toward them. Officers stopped her before she could enter the house, but she caught sight of the bodies inside. When she realized Michael was gone, she was devastated. Despite her grief, she quickly came under suspicion. Investigators briefly considered the possibility that someone infatuated with Samantha, perhaps a jealous admirer, had tried to eliminate Michael and targeted the others as witnesses. But that theory never led anywhere conclusive. The investigation shifted when Angela brought up a name during questioning. When asked if anyone might have held a grudge against the family, she unexpectedly mentioned Johnny Borisov, a former boyfriend she had broken up with in a heated argument just a couple of months earlier. The two shared a young son. Their relationship had been complex and emotional. Initially, Angela had been dating Johnny's best friend, Stephen, who tragically lost his life in a serious car crash along with his father about 3.5 years ago. In the aftermath, Johnny supported her, helped her through the grieving process, and over time, their friendship turned romantic. A year later, Angela became pregnant. She and Johnny decided to get married, and he moved into the Kramer family home. But as time went on, it became clear that Johnny had expected the relationship to offer him a life of comfort, without work. He relied heavily on the Kramers' financial support. He also had a short fuse, displayed manipulative tendencies, and struggled significantly with anger management. Johnny had been pressuring Angela to convince her parents to buy them a separate house. When that didn't happen, he started trying to stir up tension between her and the rest of the family. That kind of behavior is ultimately what led to the breakup. The couple never made it to the altar, and now the two young parents were going through a custody battle over their son. Interestingly, on the day of the incident, Johnny had picked up the boy and taken him to his parents' apartment, but didn't stay there himself. Johnny quickly became the primary suspect. He was brought in for questioning almost immediately. He certainly seemed to have a motive, but law enforcement still needed concrete evidence to prove he was involved. During interrogation, Johnny claimed he had been at a casino the entire night and hadn't left once. That alibi was later confirmed thanks to the venue's extensive surveillance footage, which showed him consistently throughout the night. Still, investigators weren't ready to rule him out. His behavior raised red flags. Something about it just didn't sit right. There was speculation that Johnny might not have been directly involved, but could have hired someone else to carry out the act. Given his motives and history, that theory seemed plausible. It also came to light that Johnny had previous run-ins with the law related to distributing banned substances. He had been arrested multiple times, but somehow always received light penalties or avoided serious consequences altogether. However, he had never been charged with anything involving aggressive behavior. About half an hour after the initial report of the tragic events at the Kramer home, the local police received another call that, at the time, seemed completely unrelated. A young man phoned in, clearly distressed and nearly in tears. He claimed someone was following him and that he was being chased in his car. The caller was a man named Jacob. Later, it was revealed that he had a history of emotional instability, including bouts of depression and anxiety. On its own, the call might have been dismissed as a false alarm, if not for one key detail. For the past couple of months, Jacob had been living with Johnny Borisov. After his breakup with Angela, Johnny didn't want to return to his parents' home, and he couldn't afford his own place. That's when he found a roommate to split the rent, Jacob. Jacob was soft-spoken, timid, and extremely impressionable. Raised in a strict religious household, he was used to following rules and being told what to do. From his teenage years, he had struggled with anxiety, numerous phobias, and depressive episodes, making him particularly susceptible to influence. Background checks showed that Jacob had never been in trouble with the law. People who knew him described him as quiet, polite, and somewhat withdrawn, maybe a little strange but not dangerous. While some suspected he may have been dealing with mental health issues or substance use, no one could say for sure. Interestingly, since there was no direct evidence or formal charges against Johnny, investigators could only bring him in for informal questioning, which meant he was free to leave or return at any time. During the interview, he kept stepping out to make phone calls and was constantly texting someone. This raised concerns among the detectives, so they filed for a warrant to examine his phone activity. As it turned out, Johnny had been calling and messaging someone saved in his contacts as Jay. That person was none other than Jacob, the same young man police had been trying to locate without success. The calls and texts didn't contain any direct incriminating statements, but Johnny appeared to be trying to calm Jacob down, repeatedly telling him not to say anything that could cause problems. In recent years, Jacob had barely spoken to his parents and had been living with his grandparents before moving in with a roommate a couple of months prior. Authorities reached out to the elderly couple, but they hadn't heard from their grandson in some time. Jacob had told them he would visit soon, but never showed up or called back. His grandparents confirmed that Jacob had struggled with depression since he was young. At times, he experienced paranoia and had been treated at a mental health facility. However, despite these challenges, Jacob was resistant to medication. He believed he could manage his condition without it and often refused to take prescribed treatments. Jacob's family had long been wary of his new best friend. They believed Johnny was a bad influence and may have been taking advantage of him. But since both were adults living on their own, no one could intervene. As previously mentioned, Johnny had a history with law enforcement tied to the distribution of banned substances. After moving in with Jacob and learning about his mental health struggles, Johnny offered a different kind of solution. He encouraged Jacob to use certain psychoactive substances to cope. That's how Johnny got his roommate hooked on the very things he was selling. Jacob became dependent quickly. When he couldn't afford another dose, Johnny would offer it in exchange for favors. Over time, Jacob unknowingly became completely controlled by his so-called friend, a vulnerable young man manipulated by someone who clearly knew how to exploit weakness. A disturbing pattern began to emerge, and the suspicion around the two roommates grew stronger. It became increasingly likely that Johnny had orchestrated an act of revenge against his ex and her family, using Jacob as the one to carry it out. Emotionally unstable and struggling with addiction, Jacob might not have even fully understood what he was doing. Soon, another piece of the puzzle came to light. About a month before the triple crime, Jacob had legally purchased and registered a .40 caliber handgun. How someone with a history of mental health concerns was able to buy a firearm remains a mystery. Apparently, a thorough background check was not conducted, and he was sold a gun, supposedly for self-defense. This weapon was a match in model and caliber to the one used in the Kramer case, but a ballistics test was needed to confirm whether it was the same gun. Several other pieces of circumstantial evidence also pointed toward Jacob's involvement. But one big question remained: where was Jacob now? On March 4th, Jacob's worried parents contacted the police to report something unusual. For the first time in nearly 2.5 years, their son had unexpectedly shown up at their home. He seemed nervous, was acting strangely, and begged them to hide him, even if just for a little while. According to him, some gang members were after him, supposedly hired by the head of a local drug trafficking ring because he had failed some kind of mission. Jacob appeared to be under the influence of banned substances and was experiencing another episode of paranoia. He drew all the curtains, warned his parents not to go near the windows or answer any calls, and then went down to the basement, where he fell asleep on an old couch. By the time law enforcement arrived, Jacob had slept off some of the effects and was more coherent. He was taken in for questioning and shared a bizarre story, one he seemed to believe wholeheartedly. He asked only for one thing in return: that the police keep his parents safe from the so-called gangsters, and in exchange, he would confess everything. Jacob claimed it was Johnny who got him hooked on banned substances and who had been supplying them regularly. The problem, he said, was that he didn't always have money to pay, and his debts began to pile up. That's when Johnny allegedly told him he was connected to a powerful cartel, and that they were already aware of Jacob's unpaid balance. Worse, according to Jacob, Johnny insisted that his ex, Angela, had discovered his supposed ties to these dealers and was planning to expose him out of revenge. Jacob was told that the cartel's boss had found out about this and ordered her to be silenced, and that Jacob was expected to carry it out as payment for his debt. Jacob believed every word. He feared for his life and for the safety of his family. What he didn't know was that the cartel, the hit order, and the entire story had been made up. Johnny had fabricated the entire tale to manipulate Jacob into committing an act of revenge against Angela and her family. Under Johnny's influence, and in a state of paranoia, Jacob broke into the Kramer home by smashing a living room window. Almost immediately, he encountered Michael and his girlfriend asleep on the couch. Jacob chased them down and opened fire, taking Michael's life. The sound of the gunshots alerted Jeffrey and Lori upstairs, and they rushed out of their bedroom, only to be struck down on the staircase. After that, Jacob didn't come across any more family members. As panic set in, he fled the scene. At some point, convinced he was being chased by imaginary gang members for failing the task, he made a terrified call to emergency services. That call ended up being the breakthrough in the case. It gave investigators the lead they needed and helped them solve the crime in record time. Jacob eventually revealed where he had hidden the weapon used in the crime, along with the clothes he had worn that night. The evidence recovered, along with his confession, helped law enforcement reconstruct the entire sequence of events and confirm both his and Johnny's involvement in the triple crime. However, detectives decided to take a strategic approach, concerned that Johnny might try to shift blame or manipulate the legal process. They placed both suspects in the same interview room and told them to wait a few minutes for the investigator to return. Once alone, Johnny immediately started pressuring Jacob to take full responsibility, claiming that if he didn't, the gang members would go after his family. What Johnny didn't know was that the room was under audio and video surveillance. Every word he said was recorded, and that conversation confirmed everything investigators had suspected about his role in manipulating Jacob. Jacob ultimately agreed to a plea deal in exchange for avoiding the death penalty. He was sentenced to 75 years in prison with no possibility of parole. Effectively, a life sentence. Johnny received the same fate, life behind bars with no chance for early release. Despite multiple attempts to appeal the decision, all of his efforts have so far been unsuccessful. Thanks for watching, everyone. Your support means a lot to me, and you can help my channel grow by hitting that like button, dropping a comment, and sharing this video. Your engagement really makes a difference. See you soon.